My name is Marisol Vidal. I am 29 years old, and I used to believe that working harder than anyone else in the room was enough to earn your place at the table, even when that table belonged to your own family. I was wrong. There is a folder in the bottom drawer of my desk at the office. Manila, letter size, labeled in my handwriting with the name of an account and a year. It has been there for 2 years. I put it there the day I decided that the work I had built needed to exist somewhere more permanent than my father's gratitude, and I left it there, undisturbed, until the morning he sat me down to explain that I would no longer be needed in the same way. That folder is the reason that conversation did not go the way he planned. I had been with Vidal Import Solutions for 6 years by the time my father signed the papers. 6 years of early mornings and late calls with vendors in 3 time zones. 6 years of learning the freight side, the customs side, the client side, learning all of it without being asked, because I understood even then that the business needed someone who could hold all of it at once. My father, Ernesto Vidal, had built the company from a single warehouse lease and a borrowed truck in 1991. He was proud of that story. He told it at every industry dinner, every family gathering, every conversation that lasted longer than 10 minutes. I had heard it so many times I could recite it in the dark. I never interrupted him. I always listened as though it were the first time. What I did not say, in those 6 years, was that the company he built in 1991 was not the company that existed in the year I came home from college and walked into the office on a Tuesday morning and asked him where I should start. The freight market had shifted. The margins on the import side had thinned. 2 of the legacy accounts, clients my father had held for over a decade, had quietly moved to a competitor 18 months before I arrived, and no one in the office had told him yet. I found out on my 3rd day, reading through a filing cabinet that nobody had touched in 2 years. I did not panic. I made a list. That was always how I worked. I made lists. I found the problem before it announced itself, and I built a quiet solution and implemented it and moved to the next thing. My father called this efficiency. What he meant, I think, was that I was useful, the way a good logistics software is useful or a reliable freight carrier is useful. Present. Functional. Not requiring much acknowledgement. The office was on the east side of the city, 3rd floor of a building my father owned outright. That was the one real estate decision he had made in 30 years that had compounded correctly, and he mentioned it often. My desk was near the window that faced the loading dock. I had chosen that desk on purpose. I wanted to see what was moving and what was sitting still. If you have ever worked inside a family business, you already know the particular silence I am describing, the one where your contribution is so woven into the daily operation that it becomes invisible, the way load-bearing walls are invisible once the house is finished. Think about whether anyone in your family has ever actually named what you built. I want you to hold that thought. By the end of my 1st year, I had renegotiated 2 carrier contracts, recovered one of the lapsed legacy accounts, and identified a mid-size regional distributor, a produce and dry goods operation called Calder Pacific, that was underserved by its current freight broker and looking for a more integrated solution. I put together a proposal on a Sunday afternoon, printed it, and left it on my father's desk with a short note. He read it on Monday. On Wednesday he told me it was a long shot, but I could pursue it if I had time after my regular work was done. I had the contract signed within 60 days. Calder Pacific became our largest single account. By the 3rd year of that relationship, it represented $2.1 million in annual revenue, just over 40% of the company's total operating income. I managed it personally. Every quarterly review, every rate renegotiation, every relationship call when their operations director changed, which happened twice. I organized those transition calls, prepared the briefing documents, coached the new director through the service structure so there was no gap in continuity. My father attended one meeting with me in the 1st year, shook hands, said something about the family legacy, and never came back to another one. The Calder team knew my name. They called me directly. When there was a problem, a customs delay, a damaged shipment, a billing dispute, they called my cell phone, not the office line. My father knew the account existed. He reviewed the revenue figures every quarter. What he did not know, because he had never asked and I had never volunteered it, was the specific nature of how that relationship was structured, or what I had done, quietly and legally, in the 3rd year of managing it. I squared the papers on my desk and said nothing about that part. My brother, Daniel, was 34. He had come into the business 4 years after me, after a 2-year stretch working for a cousin's trucking operation in the valley. He was not bad at the work. He understood the freight side well enough, and he was good with drivers. Easy to talk to, remembered names, that kind of thing. What Daniel was not good at was the client side, the contract side, or anything that required sitting still long enough to read a document carefully. He knew this about himself. We had never discussed it directly, but I think he knew it. What Daniel was good at was being my father's son in a way that I, as my father's daughter, was structurally prevented from being. He could sit across from my father at the end of a long day and drink coffee and talk about the warehouse expansion in the same register my father used, the register of men who had decided things. I did not resent Daniel for this. I understood it as a fact of the environment, the way I understood the carrier rate structure or the customs clearance timelines. It was a variable I had to account for. My mother, Patricia, worked 3 days a week in the office handling accounts payable. She was organized, careful with numbers, and completely loyal to my father's version of every situation. When my father formed an opinion, my mother's job, as she understood it, was to hold it steady. She was good at that job. The 4 of us had dinner together on the second Sunday of every month. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother brought the food out in a specific order that had not changed in 20 years. Daniel and I sat across from each other. The conversations followed predictable channels: the business, the building, a neighbor's situation, a cousin's wedding or illness. I contributed when I had something specific to add. I listened the rest of the time. This was the shape of my life inside the company. I was good at my work. I was present at the table. I was invisible in the way that necessary things are invisible, and I had accepted that, provisionally, with the part of myself that understood patience as a strategy rather than a surrender. The first time I understood clearly that my father did not see me the way I saw myself, I was 24 years old, and we were at an industry dinner at a hotel downtown, the Regional Freight Association's annual event, 40 tables, bad chicken, and a lot of people exchanging business cards they would never follow up on. My father introduced me to a man named Gerald Oakes, who ran a mid-size customs brokerage and had been a professional acquaintance of my father's for 15 years. Gerald Oakes was the kind of man who looked at you while waiting to look at the next person. He shook my hand with the tips of his fingers. "This is my daughter," my father said. "She helps out in the office." I had, at that point, recovered a lapsed account, renegotiated 2 carrier contracts, and was 60 days into the Calder Pacific pursuit that would become the company's largest revenue source. I helped out in the office. I folded the small cocktail napkin I was holding into a tighter square and said nothing. Gerald Oakes nodded and turned back to my father and asked about the warehouse expansion, and the conversation moved on without me. I stood there for another 2 minutes, then excused myself to get a glass of water I did not want, and I stood near the window and looked at the parking lot and thought about the Calder proposal sitting on my father's desk and what 40% of the company's operating income would look like in 3 years. That was the first time. It was not the last. The introductions never changed. Over the years, at industry events, at family gatherings, at a supplier lunch I had personally organized and prepared the agenda for, my father introduced me as his daughter who helped with the office, or his daughter who handled some of the client coordination, or simply his daughter, with no further description, as though the sentence were complete. I began to notice that he introduced Daniel differently. Daniel ran the freight operations. Daniel managed the driver relationships. Daniel was being groomed for a larger role. These were factual statements. They were also the only factual statements my father made about either of us in public. I did not raise this with him. I noted it the way I noted everything, as a variable in the environment, something to account for in my planning. What I was planning by the time I was 27 had a shape that my father did not know about yet. In my 3rd year managing the Calder Pacific account, I had a series of conversations with their operations director, a careful, detail-oriented woman named Susan Cho, about the long-term structure of our service agreement. Calder was growing. They were expanding into 2 new distribution regions and needed a freight and logistics partner who could scale with them. Their board wanted contractual continuity, a named point of contact with decision-making authority, not just a representative of a family business whose leadership structure was informal and undocumented. I understood what Susan Cho was telling me. She was telling me that Calder needed to know that the person they were contracting with had real legal authority over the service relationship, not just a role that could be reassigned at a family dinner. I hired an attorney. Her name was Clara Ibarra, and she specialized in commercial contracts and small business structuring. I told her what I needed. She told me what was possible. What was possible was this. I could establish a separate legal entity, a single-member LLC that would serve as the formal contracting party for the Calder Pacific account. Vidal Import Solutions would remain the operational service provider. The LLC would hold the master service agreement. I would be the sole member of the LLC. Calder's board approved the restructured contract within 30 days. The revenue still flowed through the company's operating accounts. The agreement itself, the legal instrument that governed the relationship and gave either party the right to continue or terminate, was held by an entity that my father did not own and could not dissolve. I told Clara Ibarra to keep the filing quiet. Not hidden, it was a matter of public record, as all LLC filings are. Simply not announced. I put the signed contracts in that manila folder, labeled it with the account name and the year, and set it in the back section of my desk drawer. I did not think of it as a weapon. I thought of it as a load-bearing wall. That was 2 years before my father signed the papers. The overseas assignment came in February of the year I turned 29. Calder Pacific had completed their regional expansion and was now piloting a direct import line, produce from 3 suppliers in Chile and 1 in Peru. They needed someone to go on site, meet the suppliers, audit the cold chain logistics, and negotiate the inbound freight terms. They asked for me specifically. They always asked for me specifically. I told my father about the trip during our Monday morning check-in. I had a 1-page summary prepared. The scope, the timeline, 6 to 8 weeks, the expected contract value of the new import line, and what it would mean for Calder's annual volume with us. I had spent a Sunday afternoon building that summary, cross-referencing the Chilean supplier data against our existing inbound rate structures, identifying where the margin opportunity was strongest and what quality control variables we would need to audit on site before committing. It was ready work, careful work. My father listened. He looked at the summary. He asked who would handle my other accounts while I was away. I told him I had already prepared handoff notes and that Daniel could cover the routine items. My father nodded. He said it was a long time to be away. I told him the contract opportunity was worth it. He looked at the summary again and said, "All right, if you think it's necessary." I capped my pen and set it down and told him I had already booked the flights. I landed in Santiago on a Tuesday night in late February. The air coming off the runway was cool and smelled of diesel and eucalyptus. I had a rental car, a hotel near the first supplier's facility, and a meeting at 7 the following morning. I sent my father a brief message when I landed, arrived safely. "We'll update after first meeting." He replied 2 days later. A single line, "Let us know how it goes." The first 2 weeks were hard in the way that field work is always hard. Long days, a lot of translation work, supplier relationships that had to be built from scratch in rooms that were not set up for building them. But by the end of the 3rd week, I had audited all 4 cold chain facilities, identified 2 carriers who could handle the inbound volume at competitive rates, and drafted a preliminary freight agreement that Susan Cho's team had already reviewed and marked up once. We were close. I sent weekly updates to the office. They were detailed: supplier names, rate comparisons, timeline projections, the specific quality control issue I had found at one of the Chilean facilities, and how I had resolved it before it became a problem. My father responded to 2 of them. Brief acknowledgments. My mother sent a message in the 5th week asking if I was eating enough. Daniel sent nothing. I was in my hotel room in Lima, reviewing the final supplier agreement, when my phone showed a missed call from my father's personal number. It was early morning his time, unusual. I called him back within the hour. He did not answer. He sent a text instead. "We need to make some changes to the partnership structure when you get back. Don't worry about it now. Focus on the trip." I read the message twice. My throat tightened, a slow constriction that started at the base and worked its way up. I set the phone face down on the desk and looked at the supplier agreement open on my laptop and thought, with a clarity that surprised me, that I already knew what the changes were going to be. I felt, in that moment, a grief that had no clean name. Not anger exactly, not surprise, but something closer to the particular sadness of watching a thing you always suspected confirmed in writing. I let it sit for exactly one breath. Then I picked the phone back up and replied, "Understood. I'll be home in 2 weeks." Then I opened my email and wrote a short message to Clara Ibarra, asking her to pull the Calder Pacific Master Service Agreement and have it ready for my review when I returned. I did not sleep well that night. But I finished the supplier agreement by morning, and I sent it to Susan Cho before I went down for breakfast, and she replied within the hour with 3 words, "This is perfect." I folded the printout of her reply into a small square and put it in the front pocket of my folder. 2 weeks later, I landed at home. My father had scheduled a company meeting for the following morning. A formal one. He had sent a calendar invite, which he had never done before in 30 years of running the business. The subject line read, "Partnership Structure Update. Attendance required." Daniel was already at the office when I arrived. He was standing near the front desk with his hands in his pockets, and he did not quite meet my eyes when I walked in. My mother was at her desk. She looked up when I came through the door and said, "You look tired, Mija. Did you eat on the plane?" I told her I was fine. I set my bag down at my desk and opened the drawer and checked that the manila folder was still there. It was. I sat down, squared the papers in front of me, and waited for my father to begin. My father opened the meeting at 8 in the morning. He had arranged the conference table differently than usual, his chair at the head, Daniel to his left, my mother to his right. There was a single empty chair at the far end, facing him. I sat in it and set my bag on the floor and placed the manila folder on the table in front of me, face down. My father glanced at it once and then looked away. "I wanted to do this properly," he said. "As a family." He had a document in front of him. I could see it from where I sat, 2 pages stapled with a signature line at the bottom. He did not pick it up yet. "While you were away," he said, "Daniel and I had some conversations about the direction of the company, about where we want to take it in the next 5 years, about leadership." He paused. We made some decisions. I waited. The room was quiet except for the sound of a truck backing into the loading dock 2 floors below. "We're restructuring the partnership," he said. "Daniel is going to take on a formal partner role. Co-director with me. The company needs clear leadership, and it needs someone who is here, present, day to day." He looked at me. "You're very good at what you do, Marisol. The client work, the detail work. We're not taking that away. But the ownership side needs to reflect where the company is going." I looked at him. "What does that mean for my current partnership share?" He shifted in his chair. "We're converting it. You'd move to a senior account manager role. Salary-based. Good compensation. It reflects your actual contribution." Daniel was looking at the table. My mother had her hands folded in front of her and was watching my father. "My actual contribution," I said. "You've been away for 6 weeks," my father said, and there was a patience in his voice that was not kindness. It was the patience of a man explaining something obvious to someone who was being slow about understanding it. "The business needs leadership that is present and committed. You've always been more focused on the client side, the relationship side. That's valuable. But it's not the same as running a company." "I built the Calder Pacific account," I said. "You manage it," he said. "There's a difference." I squared the manila folder in front of me with both hands and did not say anything for a moment. "I'd like to understand the legal structure of what you're proposing," I said. "Specifically how the partnership conversion affects the existing service agreements." My father waved his hand. "The attorneys have handled all of that. It's straightforward. The company contracts remain with Vidal Import Solutions. Nothing changes on the client side." "Are you certain of that?" I asked. He looked at me for the first time with something other than patient explanation in his expression. "What are you asking?" I turned the manila folder over and opened it. I did not make a production of it. I reached in, took out the first document, the LLC registration filed 2 years prior, and placed it on the table between us. Then I took out the master service agreement, 41 pages, and set it next to the registration. Then I took out a single-page summary that Clara Ibarra had prepared, which listed in plain language what each document meant and what it controlled. The Calder Pacific Master Service Agreement, I said, is not held by Vidal Import Solutions. It is held by a separate legal entity, a single-member LLC that I established in year 3 of managing the account. Calder's board required a named contracting party with documented legal authority. I provided that. The LLC is the formal party to the agreement. I am its sole member. My father looked at the documents on the table. He did not pick them up. "What does that mean?" he said, and his voice had changed. The patient register was gone, and what was underneath it was something tighter, something that did not have a name yet. "It means," I said, "that the Calder Pacific Service Agreement does not transfer with the company partnership structure. It is not a company asset. It belongs to the LLC, which belongs to me." Daniel looked up from the table. My mother made a small sound. "You can't do that," my father said. "It's already done," I said. "It's been done for 2 years. Clara Ibarra can walk you through the filings. They're public record." "You did this deliberately," he said. "You set this up too." "I set it up," I said, "because Calder's board needed contractual continuity with a named party who had real legal authority. That is the reason it exists. The timing of this conversation is yours, not mine." My father's jaw tightened. He picked up the LLC registration and looked at it and set it back down. "You cannot take a company account and move it into a private entity. That is a breach." "Of what?" I asked. I kept my voice even. "The company has no written agreement with me governing how I structure my client relationships. There is no non-compete, no assignment clause, no ownership provision covering accounts I originated. Clara reviewed all of it before I filed. If you'd like your attorneys to review her analysis, I can have her send it over this morning." The room was very quiet. My father looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at his hands. "You planned this," my father said. "I built something," I said. "The same way I've always built things." He tried for another 20 minutes. He said the family would contest it. He said no attorney had told him this was legitimate. He said I was acting against the company, against the family, against everything he had built. His voice rose through each of those statements, climbing past the careful patience into something rawer and louder, and when he finished, the room was quiet again, and I had not raised my voice once. I waited until he was done. Then I squared the documents back into the folder, and I said what I had been carrying for 6 years. "You introduced me to Gerald Oakes at the freight dinner," I said. "You told him I helped out in the office. I had closed the Calder Pacific deal 30 days before that dinner, 40% of this company's revenue. 40%. I organized every quarterly review for 3 years, prepared every rate negotiation, rebuilt the relationship twice when their operations director changed. But at that dinner, I helped out in the office." My father said nothing. "At the supplier lunch in March, the one I organized, the one I spent a Saturday preparing the agenda for, the one where I coordinated the catering, the presentations, and the follow-up documentation, you introduced me to the Meridian rep as your daughter who handles some of the client coordination. I had renegotiated our 2 largest carrier contracts that quarter and saved this company $80,000 in annual freight costs. That quarter, I personally reviewed every line of both agreements, identified 3 clauses that were costing us money, and restructured the terms. I handled some client coordination." My mother looked at her hands. "When I told you about the Santiago trip, I said, you asked who would cover my work while I was away. You did not ask what I was going to build there. I came back 6 weeks later with audited cold chain facilities, a vetted carrier shortlist, a negotiated supplier agreement, and a new import line for our largest account. You sent me 2 replies in 6 weeks. Daniel sent none." I looked at my brother for a moment, then back to my father. "I am not saying this to shame anyone in this room. I am saying it because I want everyone here to understand what was actually happening while I was being described as someone who helped out. I stood. I picked up the folder. I don't want to take the account away from this company, I said. I want a partnership structure that reflects what I actually contribute, in writing with an attorney present in the next 30 days. If that's not something you're willing to do, then Calder's renewal comes up in 4 months, and I'll need to make a decision about what entity I renew it under. I walked to the door. I did not slam it. I pulled it closed behind me with both hands, quietly, the latch catching with a small, clean sound. Daniel found me in the parking lot 20 minutes later. He had his jacket on and his hands in his pockets, and he looked the way he always looked when he did not know what to say, like a man waiting for someone else to start the sentence. I didn't know about the LLC, he said. I know, I said. Dad's, he stopped. He's on the phone with the attorneys. Good, I said. They'll tell him what Clara already told me. Daniel was quiet for a moment. How long have you been planning this? I thought about that. I wasn't planning it, I said. I was protecting it. There's a difference. He nodded slowly, like he was working out what that meant. Then he said, the company needs Calder. I know, I said. So what happens now? I looked at him. That depends on what Dad decides in the next 30 days. Daniel went back inside. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes and watched the loading dock and thought about the first day I had sat at that desk by the window, 23 years old, reading a filing cabinet no one had touched, making a list of what needed fixing. 6 years of lists. 6 years of carrier contracts and supplier audits and quarterly reviews and Sunday afternoons writing proposals that got a nod and a "if you have time." 6 years of handoff notes I prepared so thoroughly that someone else could have walked into my accounts without a single question and never known I was the one who built them from nothing. My father called me that evening. He did not apologize. He said he wanted to schedule a meeting with both attorneys present and that he was willing to discuss a formal partnership structure. His voice was controlled, careful. The patient register was back, but thinner now, like a coat worn in the wrong season. I told him I would have Clara send her availability. My mother called an hour after that. She said she did not entirely understand what had happened in the meeting, but that she could see I had worked very hard and that maybe the family had not always acknowledged that properly. It was the closest she had come, in 6 years, to saying what she almost meant. I told her I loved her and that everything was going to be fine. I think it will be. But on different terms than before. There is something I have thought about often in the months since that morning, something that took me a while to find the right words for. A load-bearing wall does not announce itself. It stands in the middle of the house and holds the weight that everything else depends on, and nobody thinks about it until someone suggests taking it down, and then suddenly the whole conversation changes, because you cannot take down a load-bearing wall without the ceiling coming with it. I spent 6 years being that wall. I built the account that kept this company breathing. I flew to Santiago and Lima and negotiated with suppliers in rooms that were not built for negotiating and came back with agreements that will grow this business for the next decade. I organized the lunches, prepared the agendas, renegotiated the contracts, managed the transitions, and handled the disputes. All of it consistently, without being asked twice and without being named once in a way that matched what the work actually was. I did all of it without asking to be seen. That was partly patience and partly strategy and partly, I will be honest, a younger version of myself who believed that the work would speak loudly enough on its own. It does not. Work is quiet. It sits in filing cabinets and spreadsheets and signed contracts, and it does not raise its hand. You have to learn to raise it yourself, not with noise, not with threats, but with documentation. With the quiet architecture of something you built so carefully that when someone tries to take it away, they discover it was never theirs to take. That is the thing I would tell the version of me who folded that cocktail napkin at a freight dinner and said nothing. The silence was right. The patience was right. But the structure had to be built on paper, not just in practice, because practice lives in memory, and memory belongs to whoever is telling the story. Now I am the one telling it. If this story made you stop and think about what you have built that nobody has named, or about the work that holds your own family together in ways no one mentions, share it with someone who needs to hear it. there are more people carrying load-bearing walls than anyone talks about. This is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes. All characters, names, and events are entirely invented.